Little Red by Pam Shiller. Once upon a time, in a town not far away, there lived a sweet little girl and her mother. The little girl's mother made her daughter a beautiful hat from red wool. It suited the little girl so well that she wore it every day. For that reason, everyone called her Little Red. One day, her mother told Little Red that her grandmother was sick in bed with a cold. She handed her a basket to take to her grandmother. In the basket, there was a jar with soup, fruit, and bread. Little Red set out immediately to go to her grandmother, who lived across town. To get there, she had to go through the woods. On her way, she met with a wolf. The wolf asked Little Red where she was going. Not knowing that the wolf was dangerous, she answered, "I'm going to see my grandmother, who lives behind the movie theater." "Well," said the wolf, "and I'll go see her too. And I'll go this way, and you go that way. We will see who gets there first." Little Red took her time. She stopped to smell the pretty dandelions. She listened to the singing and chirping of the birds. She lay down and watched the clouds dance across the sky. Little Red loved the way the sun felt on her face. She sat down on a rock and ate one of the apples her mother had placed in the basket. The crisp, tart taste of the fruit filled her mouth with the nicest sensations. The wolf, instead, ran as fast as he could, and since he also took the shortest path, he arrived at Grandmother's house well ahead of Little Red. He knocked at the door. Tap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" cried Grandmother from her bed. "It's me, Little Red," replied the wolf, disguising his voice. Grandmother was delighted that her granddaughter had come to see her. She said, "Come in, sweet child," without even looking out the window to make sure it was her granddaughter. The wolf opened the door and immediately grabbed Grandmother, tied her up with the belt of her robe, and tossed her into the closet. Then he took one of her nightgowns, put it on, and climbed into her bed. He anxiously awaited the arrival of Little Red. After some time, Little Red knocked at the door. Tap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" cried the wolf, again disguising his voice. Little Red, hearing the big voice of the wolf, was worried. She thought to herself, "That cold must have made Grandmother's voice hoarse." "It's your granddaughter, Little Red," the wolf cried out to her, softening his voice as much as he could. "Come in, sweet child." Little Red opened the door and headed straight to her grandmother's bedside. As she got close to the bed, she was frightened. Her grandmother didn't even look like herself. The cold had made her eyes look strange, and her nose was several times its normal size. Thinking that her grandmother's ears must also be stopped up, she moved closer and said in a loud voice, "Grandmother, you don't look like yourself. What big eyes you have!" "All the better to see you with, my dear." Thinking her grandmother might not be able to see her very well, Little Red moved in a little closer. She noticed the grandmother's sweet powder smell was missing. "Grandmother, you don't smell like yourself." "It's the eucalyptus I use for my cold, my dear." Little Red then reached for her grandmother's hand. But the wolf's paw didn't feel at all like her grandmother's soft hand. It was rough and coarse. Immediately, Little Red let go. She moved in a little closer and surveyed her grandmother's face more carefully. "Grandmother, what big ears you have!" "All the better to hear you with, my child." "Grandmother, what big teeth you have!" "All the better to eat you up," growled the wolf as he jumped from the bed and attempted to grab Little Red. Little Red jumped away in the nick of time. Thankfully, the wolf, in his haste, got all tangled up in Grandmother's nightgown. He tripped and fell flat on the floor, bumping his head as he hit the ground. He was knocked out. Little Red pulled her cell phone from the pocket of her cape and dialed 911. After she told the operator what had happened, she began to look for her grandmother. She glanced around the room. Her grandmother was nowhere in sight. She sniffed the air, but there was no hint of Grandmother's sweet powder, only the smell of eucalyptus. Little Red stood still and listened quietly in hopes of hearing her grandmother. Aha! What was that? She was sure she heard someone knocking. She used her ears to follow the sound and ended up by Grandmother's closet. She opened the door, and there was Grandmother. Little Red untied her, hugged her, and helped her back to bed. As Little Red watched the Animal Obedience School officer haul the wolf out to the wagon, she thought to herself, I sure learned an important lesson today. I will always trust my senses. That wolf didn't sound like my grandmother. He didn't look like my grandmother. He didn't smell like my grandmother, and he didn't feel like my grandmother. He was an impostor. My senses told me that. The end.